So, in a few days, 47 Derry members and friends will make a journey across the Atlantic on a heritage trip exploring Scotland and Ireland. We will not only see some key sites of Presbyterianism, the John Knox House, which he slept in a couple times, St. Giles, Glasgow Cathedral, and First Derry Presbyterian Church in Derry, Northern Ireland, we'll also follow the path of Celtic saints. One of my favorites, whose name we will see throughout our journey, is Columba, who is one of Ireland's 3 patron saints. The other 2 are St. Bridget and St. Patrick. Columba comes from the Latin word colum, meaning dove, and his nickname was the Dove of the Church, which in Scots Gaelic is Columcille. We'll see Columcille's name throughout Ireland and the Columba name in Scotland. 2 names, same person. Kind of like Peter and Cephas. When Marie read the scripture, it was great to have Marie back, by the way. Welcome, Marie. Yay! You notice Paul says, I met with Cephas. Same thing as Peter. It's the name of the tune we sang for our first hymn this morning, if you look down and looked at those tune notes. I know it's not Advent, I'm not losing my mind, but I chose that hymn not just for its tune name, but for more. My hope is that it may make sense by the end of the sermon, even though I'll never mention Mary. St. Columba is the Irish saint who traveled from Ireland, specifically what we now know of as Northern Ireland, to what is now Scotland, and evangelized the people of that land. You might think it's somewhat unusual that here we are gathered in a clearly Protestant church, or Presbyterian church, coming out of the Reformed tradition, and I'm talking about saints. While we may not venerate them as saints, we can learn from them and appreciate them. I don't think there'd be a Presbyterian church without saints like Columba, for it was essentially through Columba that the evangelization of Scotland happened. So Columba was born in 521 in Ireland. He was of royal descent in Ireland and was ordained a priest, became a monk. A young Columcille entered the priesthood at the age of 20 when he became a pupil at Clonard Abbey, situated on the River Boyne in modern-day County Meath, just a little north of Dublin. When a prince's cousin gave him some land at Derry, he decided to start his own monastery. The site is just a couple hundred yards from Derry Presbyterian Church, and you can see a picture of it. It'll be up here. It's just inside the walls overlooking the Catholic Bogside. So you can kind of see a plaque that we'll see on our trip. And then you can see the whole church. So Columcille traveled throughout Ireland teaching about Christianity, founded some 30 monasteries in just 10 years. And then the story is told that Columba, while a monk and a priest, was also a warrior. He was a warrior monk. And like all of us, he was plagued by sins like anger and pride and jealousy. We're all saint and sinner intermingled. There was an episode in his life, a 6th century copyright dispute, disagreeing with Abbot Finian of the Clonard Abbey. Columba lost his case, and feeling dishonored, he engaged in a battle with another clan in Ireland, the result of which was the death of 3,000 men. Think about copyright. Who wrote what? We must now have a war. If you want to read more about that story, I wrote about it in my June 13th, 2022 sabbatical notes. I'm sure you printed them all out, or I'll email you a copy if you want to read it again. Columba was the victor of the battle, but went to confession, and the penance he was given for waging this battle was to leave Ireland and gain as many souls for Christ as lives that were lost in the battle. He vowed never to set foot on Ireland or see it again as penance. So in 563, Columba left Ireland, and tradition tells us that he kept going from island to island off the west coast of Scotland. Every island he would land on, he would turn back and look, and if he could still see the outline of Ireland in the distance, he would keep going until he finally landed on Iona, and Ireland was finally out of sight. So he set up his abbey there. But in 575, Columcille was persuaded to visit Ireland again to mediate a dispute between the High King and the dangerous League of Poets. I don't know what this League of Poets is, but it sounds interesting. Insisting on remaining faithful to the terms of his vow, he traveled blindfolded and strapped lumps of Scottish sod on his sandals so he wouldn't see or step foot on Ireland. Now, on the island of Iona, Columba, with his 12 followers who came from Ireland, formed this monastic community built around an abbey. Iona became not only the center for spreading the gospel throughout Scotland and northern England, but it became an important center of Christian thought and art through the production of illuminated manuscripts. It's believed the Book of Kells was written on Iona and eventually taken to Kells, Ireland, to protect the book from Viking raids. This was long after Columba's death, but his community outlived him, and eventually some of his followers moved back to Ireland and set up that community at Kells. Now, Columba did some great things, but like all great people, he was not perfect. He was not better than his day, and he still made major errors at times. And sometimes all we know about him is from stories told much later about him, that hagiography, the stories and legends of great people that often get bigger than they ever were. There was the battle for which his penance sent him to Iona, but even on Iona there are some rather odd tales. One is that he banished women and cows from the island, claiming that, and this is him, these are his words, not mine, where there is a cow, there is a woman, and where there is a woman, there is mischief. This is Columba. Now, the abbey builders had to leave their wives and daughters on the nearby island Namban, meaning woman's island. Stranger still, he also banished frogs and snakes from Iona. How he accomplished this feat is not as well documented. The strangest claim, however, is that Columba was prevented from completing the building of the original chapel until a living person had been buried in the foundations. His friend, though some stories say his son, Orin, volunteered for the job and was duly buried. Now, there are many versions of the story, but one is that Columba later requested that Orin's face be uncovered so he could bid a final farewell to his friend. Orin's face was uncovered. He was found to be still alive, but uttering what was considered blasphemous descriptions of heaven and hell. He said, "Not all that are in hell are eternally punished, and not all who are in heaven are eternally happy." Another version is that Orin stuck his head up through the dirt one day randomly and proclaimed, "There is no hell as you suppose, nor heaven that people talk about." In both versions, Columba quickly had Orin reburied. I tell that story because it's kind of interesting, but it also reminds us that saints are not perfect, and we are not perfect. You don't get to be a saint or a hero or have things named after you because you led this perfect life. If that's the bar for being venerated, being remembered, having your name on something, well, nothing's going to have anybody's name. Maybe that's the way it should be. I don't know. But no one is perfect. We also don't always know the histories. We have a lot of stories being told, a lot of interpretation well after the fact. For those who were in the issues class this morning, Dr. Fia talked about this, that history is often complicated and messy, and we usually have far less information than we'd like to make judgments. So we should always make judgments about people in the past very carefully and not always try to judge based on what we know today about ourselves and the world and what we think we know about them. The reality is, great people do great things, and silly things, and even horrible things, and yet they're able to be saints. There are biblical examples like David and Paul and Jephthah, and stories of saints like Columba and even John Knox, who is considered the father of Presbyterianism. We have rooms named for him throughout churches and windows and all these things, statues in St. Giles Cathedral. A few years ago, a movie came out about Mary, Queen of Scots. One of my favorite actors, David Tennant, played the villain in the movie, and that villain was John Knox. Even American Presbyterianism has our heroes and saints who did much good and often much bad. And sometimes where those lines are tricky. I think our church is filled with those kinds of people too. At least the pulpit is. I know I'm not perfect. I like stories of saints like Columba because it reminds me God can use really messed up and flawed people like me. It reminds us that we don't have to be defined by our worst day, that doesn't suddenly take you out of the running to be able to do something good for the world. I also like Columba because he took a journey, and I love journeys. I'm looking forward to one later this week. We read today of another saint for whom this is true, St. Paul. The letter to the Galatians is a fascinating document. It's a document in which you come across this real sense of anger on Paul's part. Some scholars look at Galatians and say that it's like looking at one side of an argument, and you can infer from what Paul is writing what he was arguing about and with whom. Essentially, Galatians is a letter in which Paul was challenging the people in church that he had found to revert back to the gospel that he had preached. It would seem that some Christians had followed Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles, but that these people had argued that in order to be a Christian, you had to first be Jewish, and therefore you had to follow the Torah, the law. Men had to be circumcised. Paul challenges this belief in the beautiful writing that there is in Galatians, but right here at the start where Marie read, we see one of the arguments Paul was trying to refute. See, those who came after him, who would have come from Jerusalem, would have known the apostles who knew Jesus. And they argued that Paul had no authority. You didn't get this from the apostles. There's no line of succession here. And that's why Paul says from the beginning, I didn't get it from any human source. I got it straight from God. God called me. I met Jesus in a revelation. I'm not going to the human apostles. What I received is directly from God. He claims that like an Old Testament prophet that God had known from before he was born, he was called to be an apostle and to proclaim God's love. And Paul even makes a point that after the experience of the revelation of Jesus, that he went on a journey. He went to Arabia and then to Damascus for a period of 3 years. We don't really know what Paul did during that time, but it's that theme of journey as a response to God's call that can be such an important one, not just in the lives of the saints as we understand them, but our own life of faith. Journey is an important theme in Scripture and in life. One of the overarching stories, what scholars might call a meta-narrative in Scripture, is the Exodus story, the journey of the children of Israel coming out of slavery into the new covenant with God, into the promised land. We evoke that story at baptism. Moses led his people out of slavery through the waters to freedom. Every baptism is the start of a journey filled with highs and lows, ups and downs, triumphs and tragedies. But we say promises over the baptized. We put water on their heads and we anoint them with oil. And in doing so, we are sending them out on their journey with the mark of baptism, the promise of God's love present with them. I've been reflecting a lot on saints and journeys recently. I've been blessed to travel a lot these last few years, and I've learned so much on each trip about myself, about the world, about history and reconciliation and God. Every journey opens a new way to see the world for me. Every journey starts me on a new one as a new person. I think Paul would understand that very well, for his journeys, especially on the road to Damascus, made him a new man with a new mission, a brand new way of understanding God. I wonder what this journey will do for the saints of Derry who are going in just a week, and the youth going later this June. What might they bring back to change this church? How might they be changed? What will they learn, remember, become passionate about? What confidence will it give them for the future? What new doorways will they want to walk through? It's not about sightseeing, it's about being more faithful disciples of the way. That's what following Jesus was called in the early church, the way. It was and always is a journey. I came across a poem recently by Edwin Muir called The Way. It's a dialogic poem, a poem in two voices. It reads, "Friend, I've lost the way. The way leads on. Is there another way? The way is one. I must retrace the track. It's lost and gone. Back, I must travel back. None goes there, none. That I'll make here my place. The road leads on. Stand still and set my face. The road leads on. Stay here, stay forever here. None stays here, none. I cannot find the way. The way leads on. O places I have passed, the journey's done. And what will come at last? The road leads on." Columbus' road was not easy. It was paved with sin and blessing, but it changed the world. In many ways, it started at Derry, and in many ways, its path also led to Derry, but a new Derry, across another ocean. That's how journeys work. The road leads on. You never stand still in faith. You can never really stand still in life. You can try, but the world will always pull you forward. The road leads on. You can't go back. The road leads on. That's how journeys work. The road leads on. Where might it lead us together? We won't know unless we go. So let's journey on. And that journey always leads us to this table. It's a new table every time. It's the same table. It's Christ's table, and yet we always come as a new person. The old has gone, the new has come. There's always newness and grace here. God invites all those to come to this table. There's a place for everyone at the table. There's no barriers for entry. There's no requirements for you to be able to come and participate in this meal. Everyone is welcome to share in this feast.